I am so blessed to be able to rub shoulders with you. This is gonna sound narcissistic, it is not. I'm humbled by the fact that this started in this room 13 years ago because I wanted to give back to the community, because this is where I was raised. Every day for me is a blessing. But this, I'm telling you, what we're doing here, it is such a blessing to work with people that love community and want to help businesses and grow and such. And the type of people that you are, I plan to do this till I drop dead. Because every day's a vacation, it's not work for me. I get tired, but it's not. Anyway, enough said. I'm just saying, you can have that same experience because you get into part of business what you put into it. And there's a lot to put in right now. Thank you. The type of person that he is. I'm quite anxious to see what he has to share with us today. We'll hold off the announcements till the end, but let's please welcome David Campbell.
Hey everyone. So I'm Dr. David Campbell with Wild Oak Wellness. My passion is natural medicine. That's why I like the tagline, truly natural medicine. My doctorate is in the science of Oriental medicine, which is no longer politically correct. So my school changed it right after I left, but I'm glad they didn't change it before I left, because the reality is there's not an easy way to say that in other language. Some people say East Asian medicine, which is okay, but most people don't know what you're talking about at that point. Unfortunately, they changed the name of it to a doctorate of acupuncture and herbal medicine, which is a big mouthful. So I think Oriental medicine works, anyways. And I'm a licensed acupuncturist in this state. I've been a licensed acupuncturist in Washington and Oregon before. Actually even had a license in Colorado at one point, even though I didn't practice there. So I figured I'd start out showing you my family of origin. This is us on a Christmas. My dad is actually a quadriplegic, but you couldn't tell because even though he was in a motorcycle accident back in 2016, because of a lot of the things I was, he got really good care. We lucked out, amazing surgeon. They told us though he would never move anything but his face again. And that's after the accident. You can see he's standing up on his own. He can use his arms because we got him tons of fish oil, some herbal medicine, organic food supplements. When he was being fed through a tube, they feed them corn syrup and cornstarch and soy protein, all GMO. So we got him on organic food, we got him taking the right herbs and supplements, and he recovered. They said they've never seen a recovery like this. They don't understand how it's possible. They still don't want to know why, but that's conventional medicine. But, and these are my grandparents, my mom's parents and my dad's parents. Both my grandfathers were World War II veterans, one in Europe, the other in the Pacific. And I think a lot about them lately because I feel like we're kind of in this moment where we're not sure. The fourth turning is coming on us now. It's been 80 years. And I think we're going to have to really remember what our ancestors have been through to get us through this next decade. So I just like to, have gratitude for them. This is our cats, Cora and Aang. And my wife and I got married a couple years ago in Oregon, and so these are some of our pictures. This is our wedding party. This is me and Allison, and out in the forest. There was actually, it was crazy. We got there a day or two before the wedding, and there was just ash raining down because it was a huge fire. But luckily they got it under control. The wind changed direction, and on the day of the wedding it was mostly clear, so ended up working out. And this is our honeymoon, which it took almost 2 years to get us to actually take a honeymoon because we moved in 2021 as well as getting married. We moved out here. And so we finally got to take our honeymoon in February, and we went to Kauai, and it was super beautiful. We had pretty good, right? Yeah. Well, luckily Kauai doesn't burn as easily as Maui, but yeah, when there's neglect, things happen. But yeah, this is one of the cool things we went to is the organic noni farm. So noni's, I carry their products because they make incredible noni products. And noni is a Polynesian healing fruit. It smells and tastes very strange. It kind of smells like blue cheese. If it's raw, it almost tastes like straight black pepper. When they dry it, they dry it into a fruit leather that tastes a little bit like apricot mixed with blue cheese. So not everyone's favorite flavor, but it has incredible properties. So topically, it can help injuries heal almost twice as fast. It has an incredible antioxidant value. It's anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial. So people take it. It even helps with autoimmune disorders. So it's a pretty incredible medicine. So it was cool to see how they create their products there. So most people ask me when I tell them I practice Chinese medicine, have you ever been to China? Yes, I've been to China. This was in 2016. Luckily, it was before the ubiquitous surveillance state was fully implemented. So I love this picture because the cat is the executive management at this place. But we spent most of our time, I was in Sichuan province, which is in the southwest. So it's fairly tropical, subtropical. The capital is Chengdu. That's where we flew into. Just the massive mega city, unbelievably gigantic. But as soon as you get out of the city, it's beautiful. And we got to stay most of the time there on this sacred mountain, Omeishan, which is where I was taking some courses. But this is my friend Levi and I. We were classmates, and we spent 2 days hiking the whole mountain before classes started. So we didn't know it was going to take us 2 days. We thought we could do it in 1 day, but night started falling. We were only halfway up the mountain. So luckily, where this was is at one of the monasteries, and they have basically little bunks that you can, pay $20 to stay in overnight, and they fed us and everything. So it turned out all right. And then these are a couple pictures. Like this is some of the stuff we were learning, which was a lot about herbal preparation methods and how it changes the function of an herb depending on how you prepare it. And then this picture has the founder of my school, Heiner Fruhoff. He's actually German-born, but he's fluent in Chinese. And this is his, Qigong master, who's in his 80s, Wang Shifu, who was really nice to be able to meet before, he probably passes on in the next few years. And that's his wife. And we got to have like a little celebration with them, which was a lot of fun. So this is my office. I'm in the Coeur d'Alene Healing Arts Building, which is just a few blocks from here. So it's on Coeur d'Alene Ave, which is, only 1 block up from where we are at. And then between 5th and 6th. So it's a old red brick building. I'm on the lower story, and you can see here's my treatment area, and this is my little desk where, I do intakes and everything, and this is all my equipment. So these are just some of the things, obviously I have needles, but I also have a lot of other things. So here's some of the noni products. I actually ran out of these recently. I need to order them again. But this is a topical noni product, and this is an internal, fruit leather, which the fruit leather is really great because the noni fruit will basically instantaneously ferment if it's ripe. It ferments within 10 minutes of being picked. So they figured out how to use a method of slow, cool temperature drying to keep all the constituents intact, but to also not let it ferment, because the fermentation process breaks down a lot of the benefits too. But Classical Pearls is a great brand of Chinese herbs that actually my teacher, Heiner Fruhoff, he started this brand because he felt like most of the products on the market were either not very effective or possibly contaminated, so he actually sources each herb, making sure it's the right herb, it's not contaminated, and then he has relationships with the places that process them according to higher standards, and they don't put any fillers in. So most herbal products, when they're extracts, they boil the herb, then they have the liquid, they put the liquid on a pharmaceutical grade starch. Well, that starch comes from somewhere. It's from potato, it's from corn, maybe wheat, and those things can be allergens, 1, and 2, who knows how those plants were treated. I mean, were they GMO? Were they sprayed with pesticides themselves? So the way he does it is, instead of using a starch from who knows where. They take the herbs that they've already extracted, they dry them, grind them up, and use them as the substrate. So it's just the herb. There's nothing else in the capsule. So that's why I find their products really effective. And this is my electrostim machine. Probably a lot of you have seen some of these tools. I brought them in to show other times. But I also have a lot of my Japanese tools here, which I use for more gentle work. We can work on the points without needling them. So that's also what the tuning forks are for. You can stimulate the points or soften the tissues with much gentler methods. Some people don't like needles, or some people don't want very many needles, or very sensitive. I've had several patients recently actually that, they're so sensitive that even just a few needles seems to be like overwhelming for them. And so that's when I go, okay, we're going to switch over to just doing non-needle techniques. But those people, especially those sensitive people, get really good results from the gentler techniques. So that's the key, is also not to over-treat anyone, because, and that's why I love having a lot of different techniques at my disposal. So I figured I'd show you some basics. There's not going to be a test afterward, but the Chinese medicine is the theoretical system is based on what is often called the 5 elements. They're actually, a better translation is the 5 processes, or the 5 phenomena. And I distinguish that because people would say, well, elements, we think of the periodic table of elements. They're physical things. These aren't physical things. They're processes. So we say wood, but wood really translates as growth. Fire, transformation or maturation. So it's like the process, and you can see these things because wood is associated with spring and dawn. So it's like the beginning when things are growing really strong. Fire with summer, when like the fruit is maturing in the heat. It doesn't necessarily have to be on fire, although sometimes it is. Earth is generally considered the center, the home, but it can also be sort of, some people associate it with late summer and sort of the harvest time. But metal is sort of autumn, dusk, the final harvest, and water we associate with winter or midnight, kind of when things are in storage. And then you have these sort of associations out in the world, the macrocosm, but then we bring them into the microcosm of the body. So you have the organs, our liver and gallbladder for wood. And then there's even, an emotion, anger, that tends to affect the liver more and can be a result of the liver, say, being inflamed. So you have these kind of associations that help you organize your thinking, which seems deceivingly simple at first, but it gets applied in many different ways. It's a very layered sense. So I thought I'd show, here's a diagram of the channel pathways. And I like to say there's 2, even in our most ancient text, which is around 2,500 years old, there's 2 ways to practice acupuncture. One is the channels. And so each of the 12 primary channels is associated with one of the 12 major internal organs. And each point along the channel has a slightly different effect on the physiological functions. So that gives us somewhere around 360 channel points. There's also other points that are between channels or have different associations that way. But then there's a whole other way of looking at acupuncture, which is the anatomy, the muscles, the connective tissue, the skeletal system. And a lot of people will call that dry needling. Dry needling came out of trigger point therapy, which was developed in the 70s by a couple of orthopedists. And the irony is pretty much all the trigger points are already acupoints. They just identified them based on anatomical relationships, like referred pain or entrapment of different things. And it's like, yes, and that was already part of acupuncture, because there's a whole chapter devoted to the idea of looking at basically how the muscles and the fascia interconnect and what it means when there's a dysfunction somewhere, how you might look at the other places that are related to that, i.e. the referral zones, which is what they call them in trigger point. So the reason they call it dry needling in trigger point therapy is because they were originally using injections of anesthetic, then injections of saline. Then they realized actually you don't need to inject anything, it still works with a dry needle. So they reinvented acupuncture, although I have a feeling they might have known a little bit that acupuncture was a thing. Because in the 70s, that's when acupuncture actually became fairly well known to the West, because that was when Nixon finally went to China. And there was actually a New York Times reporter who he got appendicitis while he was in China, and he ended up getting acupuncture. He had surgery, but then he also had acupuncture for his recovery, and he wrote about it in the New York Times, and it was this whole big thing. So this is another way we think about the organs, is they each have a time of day when we say they have the greatest tide, or and you can think the really obvious one is 1 to 3 a.m. is the liver. So this is a time when a lot of people wake up in the middle of the night, because this is the time when a lot of the blood goes into the liver for detoxification. It actually swells up quite a bit and has a lot more blood in it than during the day. But sometimes that detox process wakes people up. So anyways, that's a really common one. But each organ has its time of day, like stomach, kind of breakfast time. The large intestine right when you wake up, because that's when you're supposed to have your first bowel movement. So anyways, they each have their own associations that way. So I thought I'd give a sort of timeline, like, because, this medicine, I think of it, so people call it TCM, traditional Chinese medicine. There's some sense in which that's a reasonable way to describe it, but it's practiced in a lot of places that aren't China, including right here, right? And a lot of the things we're doing aren't necessarily what they were doing, 2,000 years ago. The technology for needles has obviously advanced quite a bit, but there's sort of a relationship to the lineage and the understanding. So the oldest sort of textbook is the Yellow Emperor's Inner Classic. It's dated to the oldest version we have of it is around 200 to 500 BC. So that's what I was saying, around 2,500 years ago is when we get clear evidence of the written record. But there's descriptions in that text that go back, they claim 10,000 years to an ancient golden age before the flood, and how the people back then actually knew how to do medicine much better than we do now, and that we actually are just trying to piece it back together still. So the interesting thing about that is, too, there's a lot of similarities between the Greek, Egyptian, and Indian traditions from these time periods. They're different but similar. They have a lot of the same thinking. And then when we look at the Americas, the Mayan, the Incan traditions also start to line up with these things as well. They even have I believe in Bolivia, they found what they claim was a 9,000-year-old stone inscription with the channels and the points inscribed on them. So, I think, it's hard to tell where this goes, but, there's a 5,300-year-old, body, found in the ice in the Italian Alps. With
Iceman.
Yeah, Otzi the Iceman, who was found with acupoints tattooed on him, satchel of needles on his belt. And the tattoo of the points was a treatment for heart disease, which they found he did have because they were able to x-ray him. So, again, how far does it go back? It goes back at least to that text. But that text didn't come out of nowhere, right? It came out of a lot of threads of knowledge that were trying to be consolidated at that point in time. So, I think the story of Noah's Ark, there's some truth to it because every culture seems to talk about the flood. There was some kind of civilization before that, and they claim that that's where this information really comes from. So my career path, I went to UC Irvine as an undergrad. I studied English literature and anthropology. I decided during that time that I should probably pursue medicine, not writing. So I had to take some post-bachelorate courses, so I decided to move to the Bay Area. I went to Berkeley for a couple years. That was definitely an education. I applied to osteopathic medical schools at that point because I thought, that's kind of the middle ground. They have a holistic mindset, but still have the full licensure. But what I found is when I would go there, they were very proud about that they had just merged all their residencies with the MDs. And I started to feel like maybe this isn't the right fit. So I ended up looking into naturopathic medicine, and I ended up going to the National University of Natural Medicine in Portland. And I thought I was going to do naturopathic medicine and Chinese medicine, and at least acupuncture, which is a smaller subset of Chinese medicine. But while I was there, I kind of fell in love with the Chinese medicine program and ended up feeling like if you try to practice both at once, you're practicing Western holistic with needles versus actually practicing this, Oriental medicine, as we're calling it, I guess, from its own fully fledged position, which is a very different way of looking at the human body and diagnostics. It's much more focused on what's alive in the body, not what the body's made out of, is what you can think of it. So it's important that you have the right fluids and nutrients and material that makes up the body, but there's still a difference. You can have all the right nutrients and the body can still be dead, right? Versus alive. And that difference between that living and dead is more what we're focused on here. People call it chi, life force, vital energy. I would actually say it's closer to the term information than it is to energy, because a lot of things get complex in the body and they're not actually transmitting energy anymore, they're transmitting information. But yeah, that gets into philosophically. So in terms of my actual career, I started working in Portland, which is where my school was. I helped a friend start a nonprofit called Whole Systems Healthcare, but wasn't making very good money first couple of years, so I ended up moving to another place called Azula Wellness, which was more chiropractic focused, already had a strong sort of patient flow. And then I moved here and started working in Spokane at a place called Longevity Health Center. And then eventually I started my own business in Coeur d'Alene, Wild Oak Wellness. So these are some common questions. What are the risks of acupuncture or things to avoid? So one of the only common things that happens is maybe a little bit of bruising. Most bruising is because of cupping. And I always ask people, are you okay with having bruises? They're not painful. Most people don't find them sore at all, but they do leave superficial bruises on most people, not everyone. Needling can leave a bruise. It's pretty rare for me. I would say, maybe 1 in 20 patients has even one bruise from needling. So it's not very common, but it can happen. There are bigger risks, but the bigger risks are things where you kind of have to be reckless to cause them. So the biggest risk that you can have with acupuncture is a deflated lung. And the reason is the pleura around the lungs has to maintain negative pressure to allow the lungs to inflate. So if you open a hole to the atmosphere into the pleura, that lung will deflate. Luckily, the pleura is separated, so only one side would deflate if that happened. It's extremely rare. I've never seen it or even known someone who caused it, because you kind of have to, it's like there's very simple rules to follow not to do it. Don't needle down straight between the ribs, and then, the pleura is a pretty thick material of fascia. You have to really work at it to open a hole. So to me, it's like, why are you doing that in the first place? There's nothing that you should be trying to needle on the inside of the rib cage. So, it's pretty simple not to do that. You just, around the rib cage, needles, we use sort of shallow or oblique insertions. And that way, if you did even hit a rib, it would just hit the rib and stop. There's no reason to come in and try to needle deeply over the rib cage. So, the other things, I'd say you'd be surprised how far away the brain is from the outside of the skull. It's actually pretty much impossible to get to the brain. You could hurt someone's eye, but again, you have to be a little bit reckless to do it. So I've never seen it. My research, I have a blog on my website where I share a lot of things. I kind of use those as like patient handouts in a way. So if you ever want just some free tips that I often share with people, some of those are on my blog. I I kind of mentioned the noni already. Supplements for daily use, it kind of depends on the person. I have a couple brands of multivitamins that I really like, but I tend to only recommend supplements when I think it's really going to make a difference for someone. And for some people, that a multivitamin is worth prescribing, but I sort of rarely do that. Most of the time, it'll be either an herbal formula or I prescribe a lot of probiotics, fish oil, fair amount of the time, because those are things that really are going to benefit anyone, but especially if someone's having digestive issues. I tend to go with really strong antimicrobial herbs at first, and then wean them towards something that's a little more sustainable, that they can take longer term, and then add in probiotics. And usually we can get the gut to sort of calm down and, reseed that microbiome so that the bowels can normalize and the GI tract can heal. Sometimes it takes a little more than just that, but, tuning forks, why do I use them? I love how gentle they are and yet how relaxing they are. One of the biggest things I think in our culture is most of us spend a lot of time in what they call sympathetic dominance. So our autonomic nervous system, you have parasympathetic, which is rest and digest, and sympathetic, which is kind of, at its most extreme, is fight or flight, right? But most of us are on that sympathetic side of neutral, right? We drink coffee, we stare at screens, we feel stressed about deadlines, we kind of feel hypervigilant, and it leads to a state in some people of tired but wired, like unable to sleep but really still wound up. And so what I love about things like tuning forks, it just drops people back into their body, calms their nervous system down, and then sometimes they might even fall asleep, or they'll come kind of in that halfway sleep state and actually relax for the first time in a long time. And people will sometimes tell me, I had the best night of sleep in 10 years after that treatment, because I think it's just they've been in sympathetic dominance for so long. Once they get into that parasympathetic, their body can actually begin resting, but you feel the exhaustion that's built up over time. And that exhaustion, does build up if you don't get enough sleep and rest. So top benefits of acupuncture, I would say the top things I work on, neck and back pain, really common. So I've gotten good at that. Shoulder and hip pain, really common. Knee pain, elbow. So all the joints, basically. That tends to be my bread and butter. That's 80% of the time why people come into acupuncture. I use a lot of electrostimulation because it really helps healing happen faster. And I maybe have mentioned before, one of the most extreme cases I had was a patient in his 80s, had broken his back 60 years prior in a car accident, had multiple surgeries. Luckily he could walk, but he had low back pain for 60 years. After 8 visits, he was like, I don't think I have low back pain anymore. So to me, the needling is great for opening up the scar tissue, but the electrostim makes such a huge difference in bringing vitality back to that area of the body that, the scar tissue is still there, but it wasn't causing him pain anymore. So yeah, that's kind of one of the major things. I would say other things, definitely digestive issues. I see a ton of chronic digestive issues. And a lot of times what happens is people come in for one thing. As that gets better, they start realizing, well, I have these other things, and does Chinese medicine work for that? And it's like, yeah, in terms of will insurance cover? No, but but yes, it is a medicine that's designed to be able to treat whatever's going on with you. But what I will say is the caveat, I'm not treating a Western diagnosis. So the Western diagnosis, think of as your symptoms. We call that the branch. What we're trying to treat is the root pattern that's causing that. So what's the discord deeper down that's causing those symptoms to arise? Now, it's not always going to be 100% cure. Not everything can be cured. But ideally, if we can reduce those symptoms by getting the body in greater state of harmony, people get their life back. They get their quality of life back. And, sometimes that happens quicker. Sometimes it takes a little longer. It depends on the person. But I've seen a lot of people, move well past what they were told was possible. Yeah, and I think I've talked a little bit about just general, like helping with sleep and well-being. Yeah, broken or fractured bones. So especially with that, electrostim is amazing. Study after study has shown it helps bones knit back together much faster. And my wife had a compression fracture in her wrist over the winter, and it healed much faster than they expected because we kept doing acupuncture there. But yeah, it works well for joints too. And I figured, I don't know if anyone is interested, I have some blog articles, and this is a link to my whole blog. So 3 that I thought people might be interested in is 3 free ways to improve your health, which is just some basic foundations of health. Emotional integration technique, something I talk to a lot of my patients about, because emotions often get stored in the body. So there's the organ connection that I talked about before, like different organs have different affinity for certain emotions. But there's also like a concept in, so I was trained in craniosacral, which is an osteopathic modality. And Dr. Upledger, who is credited with creating craniosacral, he had this idea of energy cysts. And what he said was, when people get a physical injury, it often leaves an imprint of their emotional state when they got it. And so when you release that physical injury, sometimes they re-experience the emotions of that time period. And that's one way of thinking about it. He even also said, well, and the energy cysts can arise even without a physical injury. So we can store, like, Freud talks about repressed emotions. Well, those repressed emotions aren't just all inside your head. The subconscious is in the whole body. So it's not super common. I wouldn't say it's even 50%. It's probably maybe 10, 20% of people will have some emotional release after acupuncture, especially the first time. And so emotional integration technique is like a little meditation I created kind of based on the Sedona method, where you just sit quietly, ask yourself some questions, and let your heart answer. So the idea is to listen using your heart as a sensory organ, because the heart rhythm is very sensitive to emotions in yourself as well as in other people. It's why sometimes you get good or bad vibes from a person. You're actually feeling that with your heart rhythm. But yeah, when you use that sensory ability, you can ask yourself, like, well, what am I feeling? Or what have I been unwilling to feel? And just give yourself some quiet time to let your heart answer that question. And what often happens is people can release a lot of pent-up emotional energy that was blocking them from getting into a better state of health. And then the Qigong basics is just it's not a full form, but Qigong, there's some basic things in it that I find help a lot of people in terms of posture, in terms of opening up the muscles and the connective tissue. It starts out with shaking, and shaking sounds sort of like little kids jumping up and down and shaking, and it does kind of look like that. But when you do it with a focus on, I'm actually trying to open these joints up, or I'm trying to open up this part of my body, it's amazing how well shaking can get into places that sometimes even stretching can't. So things like that, and horse stance, there's some details to it, but when it's done well, can actually really help realign the joints and spine and everything. So anyways, those are some of the common ones I send to people. And then this is me, and that's pretty much the end of my talk. Anyone have any questions?
Do you include any type of traditional chiropractic?
I don't do bone adjustments, but there's a lot of great chiropractors in town, so I refer to them for actual bone adjustments. But what I often find is, if you're going to the chiropractor once or even more than once a week, over and over again, my question is if that's not solving the problem, then why are you going back? Now, I think adjusting the bones sometimes does solve the problem, but if you're not getting the soft tissues to go along with that adjustment, the soft tissues are going to pull it right back out. So what I do is I generally work more on the soft tissues. What I find is sometimes people don't need a chiropractic adjustment after the soft tissues relax and adjust. Sometimes they do. So, it depends on what's gone on with the person. But yeah, I think chiropractic and acupuncture can work really well together. But yeah, it's a just different kind of way of coming at it.
Awesome.
Well, thanks.